Okay, hi, it's 12 on Monday. Just a little video recap of 3 and introduction into week 4. So, week 3, we started talking about budgets. In particular, we talked about the types of budgets and how they relate to one another. Clearly, there was the operating budget, which looks at and compares the revenues to expenses, and hopefully, right, your expenses are less than your revenues so that you can at least break even and maybe have a little bit of profit. We talked secondly about the cash budget, and this is an actual tracking of revenues coming in, expenses going out, so that you can tell if you're going to have any cash flow issues and can prepare for them, right? Because even though on an annual basis you may end up getting more revenues than you have expenses, sometimes you have to incur your expenses before the revenues are actually realized or come in. So you have to somehow plan for that so that when your bills come due, you can actually have some cash on hand to pay for them, right? And when your revenues come in later than your expenses do, that's where sometimes a line of credit from the bank helps, or having a cash reserve um, that you hold over year to year that help you. Excuse me. Excuse me. Right? Okay. And then lastly, we talked about the capital budget and how creating new physical facilities, capital facilities, can oftentimes bring with it new operating expenses. So not only do you have to worry about getting the money and repaying, well, getting the money to build the new facility or the new capital plant, you have to make sure you have out year revenues to cover the new expenses that are likely to come along with that new plant. Okay, so the capital budget is in that way related to the operating budget. Okay, and then just a little bit we talked about this notion of debt and liquidity, and the notion that your goal is to make sure you make financial decisions so that you have the resources to maximize your operating strategy and hence maximize your mission. And so a strict prohibition against debt is not always the smartest move, but you do want to always make sure that you are aware of your revenues and expenses so that and how that affects your cash position so that you can pay your bills on time. And so it's important for you to think about the fluctuations in revenues and expenses over time so you can always have that cash reserve, that liquidity target that will allow you to pay your bills timely. Okay? And weather the financial unexpected, and also to take advantage of opportunities that you may not have anticipated as well. Okay? All right, so that's essentially week 3. We're going to continue the discussion this week of budgeting, particularly preparing and managing the budget in the code book. This is a fairly vanilla review of the budget process and the monitoring of the budget throughout the year. But he highlights a couple of things I thought were worth mentioning. The first is this notion of cash reserve, very closely tied to this notion of liquidity target that we've been mentioning. I don't think he uses the term liquidity target, but the size and the appropriate size of the cash reserve is what this notion of liquidity target is about. He also talks about how to calculate a break-even point in terms of where you price your service based upon an assumed volume of service and your fixed cost and your marginal costs. He also talks about fringe benefits for your employees and calculating those and remembering that there are some fixed fringe benefit costs related to FICA, federal insurance, and something something. Sorry. But they're essentially Social Security and Medicare payments. Okay? And then he has a little section where he talks about linking financial decisions to operational outcomes. Again, this emphasis on financial decisions being judged in terms of how well they facilitate the achievement of operational goals and the maximization of mission. Okay, and I guess just in passing then, the PowerPoint that I posted last week about budget being a process, a product, and a management tool is pretty much akin to Coe's Chapter 6. Okay, it parallels and supplements that pretty well. Okay, I guess the other point I just like to make about Coe's chapter is that, and he doesn't really talk about this at all, so I wanted to bring it up, and that is that the budget process really is a political process, right? Nonprofits always want to do more than they have financial resources to actually do, and so the process by which financial decisions are made, the allocation of resources are made, the decisions for the allocation of resources, that process has to be seen as legitimate within your organization. If not, then the stakeholders that view the process as being illegitimate will also see the budget decisions and the final budget as illegitimate. And when that occurs within your organization, it just leads to a lot of festering dissatisfaction with financial decisions. And that can only undermine the unity of your organization. So that's just a side point that I think is important for you to think about. That notion of the budget process being political is in a great book called Reframing Organizations by Bowman and Deal. They have a chapter, extended section actually, a couple of chapters on the political nature of organizations, and it focuses on the process by which scarce resources are allocated through a budgetary process. And if you're interested in learning more about that, that's a great resource to look at. Okay, okay, enough for Coe. Then the case assignment this week is the AARP cases, and there are just a couple of points, right? We've stressed over and over that you need to connect your financial decisions to your operational decisions. And in this case study, they highlight how many organizations use the scorecard, the balanced scorecard, to make this connection between finances and operations. And the case study gives you an opportunity to evaluate how well AARP used the scorecard, their scorecard, to actually link financial decisions to operational goals. And that's the essence of the case assignment. Okay? And then lastly, in the discussion forums, we'll be talking about the Sojourner Truth Settlement House budgets. Okay? And these are simply year-long revenue and expense budgets, and you get a chance to practice looking at budgets and gleaning information from them and making some assessments of how the different programs are doing or not doing. Again, remember that our goal here is to have resources that support our operational goals. And so it may be difficult for you to evaluate on a whole how different programs are doing if we don't know the value of the various programs to the overall mission of the organization. But that's a whole other discussion that maybe we'll get into. Okay, I guess the last thing is simply that we haven't really gone over any tools that will help you analyze budgets from year to year. We haven't talked about common sizing budgets, which I hope to give you an example of in a couple of days. But at any rate, if you have any questions about anything in the course, always call, okay? The number is 413-237-7475. Okay, thanks.